Hello, everybody, and welcome to the LuxSci how-to webinar series. Today, we'll be talking about HIPAA-compliant email, 20 tips in 20 minutes. So we've got quite a busy schedule, lots of great info to share with you. Before we jump in, I do want to introduce our two speakers. First, we have Tom Deeb. He is the LuxSci Chief Experience Officer. So Tom is really in charge of all things customer, works with our customers every day, and really is an expert in helping you get set up for success. So say hi to everyone, Tom.
Hey, everybody.
Thank you for being here. And secondly, I want to introduce Peter Capone. Peter is LuxSci Senior Tech Support and really, among others, our on-site HIPAA expert here at LuxSci. So he's really been in the business for more than 25 years, I say, on the front lines of email security, working with companies like Microsoft and, of course, with LuxSci for the last several years. Peter's a technical expert. We'll have, a mix of, I think, kind of technical and practical content today, and Peter's going to help us dig a little deeper into some of the technical aspects of HIPAA compliant email. So say hi to everyone, Peter. Welcome.
Hi, all.
And look, a couple housekeeping items. You can submit questions throughout the session. We'll do our best to answer those in real time, and any we miss, we can cover at the end. There's a Q&A questions button at the bottom of your screen, so please feel free to use it. And let's jump in. So very quickly, for those of you that aren't familiar with LuxSci, we are a secure healthcare communications provider. We've been doing this for more than 20 years, so I like to say we're really one of the most experienced providers on the market. We do a lot of things in addition to HIPAA compliant email. We do secure marketing, secure text, secure forms, all HIPAA compliant. We really pride ourselves on flexible encryption, automation, and a real ability to segment and reach your individual targets for the best results. So we have a reputation really for the best customer support in the business. Can give Tom a little credit for that one. And we've got some good backing and really kind of serve our customers from a position of strength. And of course, HIPAA compliance, GDPR compliance, and so forth is really our bread and butter. So that's a little bit about LuxSci for those of you who may be new to the company. From here, I'm going to jump right in. Essentially, what we're going to do, we'll have a little handoff between the three speakers here. Again, we've got 20 minutes, so we want to keep it practical, informative. Most of all, we want to keep it moving and use your time as wisely as we can here. So I'm going to take the first one before I hand it over. And really, this applies to all of us and really us at LuxSci as well, who are really in this every day. And the fact of the matter is, HIPAA regulations really can be overwhelming. There's lots of different aspects you need to look at after, from technical to employees to keeping up to date on the latest rules that HIPAA puts forth. So at times it can be overwhelming. You're not alone with that. The first advice we give people is use a common sense approach. Common sense typically prevails in most cases. And of course, and it's why we're here, but never be afraid to engage experts, ask for help. We still do that as we navigate the HIPAA journey, HIPAA compliance journey. So that's tip number one. Take a deep breath. Now I'm going to hand it over to Peter, and he'll take it away with tip number two.
Whenever you're starting out with HIPAA, you want to make sure you do a security risk assessment. You want to know where your vulnerabilities lay. If you're doing primarily email, you want to make sure that PHI is not included in subject lines, uh, that it's not given out into from metadata. Um, you want to prioritize your risks and do reports to make sure that you understand where all these are. You want to document all of the steps that you're going to be taking for mitigation, what you're going to do for preventative, how you're going to detect issues, and how you're going to fix them. and you constantly want to be monitoring for issues. Um, a good usage for this is DLP, data loss prevention. You can set it up for things like credit cards, dates of birth, customer numbers, your client numbers. Uh, you basically just want to make sure that you're always familiar with where your risks are and that you're monitoring for those.
Indeed. Yeah, Peter, I would just add to that, do these annually. It's always prudent to have an up-to-date risk assessment. Threats are constantly changing, the landscape's constantly changing. So it's not a one and done type scenario with these, but really something you need to do an annual basis, maybe even more frequently. Okay, let's go over to Tom for tip number 3.
Course. So really important that as we take into account our risk assessment and we take inventory of where our data are living, it's very important that we understand what the consequences are of non-compliance, right? So as we look across this screen here, we can see the specific penalties for tier 1 through tier 4, right? But it actually goes beyond that, right? And as we look with data breaches, fines and legal action, operational disruptions, the last one is, to me, one of the most important ones, particularly as someone who leads our customer facing teams, right? Your patient trust or customer trust and the reputation that you've built is hugely important, right? And so that's a quick tip number 3. But as you um as you take that into account, right, it's very important for you to consider what you can do when you are being compliant, right? There are a ton of benefits that come along with working with compliant solutions and having those tight compliance programs, right? When we think about email in particular, right, there's email encryption and all of that, right? And what that does in the power of that is it really allows you to use your PHI in the same way that every other unregulated industry does, right? Creating specific targeted messaging that's personalized to recipients, right? Highly segmented, create a ton of impact on really, your patients or your customers, makes an incredible difference when it comes to the effectiveness of your messaging.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Tom. And we've got a question here from Kate. And just quickly, absolutely, Kate, we will provide this presentation after the fact. I'll also point out, several of the slides have what we call learning resources. This one here, you'll note on the bottom, HIPAA compliant personalization with PHI. So there will be some additional materials and leverage once we send out the deck to everybody. Okay, so
Could
we're
you
going to
just
go
repeat
back to
that? Unfortunately, your voice distorted during the last part of
uh,
that when you're discussing it.
Sure. I was letting Kate know we will send the presentation as a follow-up, and it includes some learning resources on several slides, in this case, a post on personalization. So be on the lookout for that. We'll provide all this information. So I'm going to hand it over to Peter to talk encryption.
Okay. So well, the primary PHI protection that we do here is making sure that all email that our customers send that are for their HIPAA accounts are encrypted. Per HIPAA, all email has to be encrypted when you're sending it, especially if you're a covered entity. Uh, your customers, if it's their information, can send it to you unencrypted. It's their information. They can do whatever they want with it. But it's always best to send them to a secure portal so that when they're sending you their information, they can send it to you securely too, especially if their provider doesn't provide such a feature for them themselves. LuxSci does have a secure portal you can send people to, which is free to sign up. You can have them send you secure emails that way. Most providers do have this functionality. Just want to point out that if your customers are worried about sending their information, you can send them to a secure portal, have it sent to you. The secure portal should use TLS 1.2, PGP, or SMIME to make sure that the data is fully encrypted while in transit from point A to point B. All right.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Peter. We are on schedule, which is great to see here. I'm going to stay with you for tip number 6 on authentication.
All right. One of the key components of protecting your customers' data is making sure that only the appropriate people have access to your systems, especially support and internal systems. For that, multi-factor authentication is the way to go. You want to make sure that with multi-factor that people are using a PIN or a passcode with a multi-factor authentication app and not just getting a text message. Text messages are no longer considered secure per the government for multi-factor authentication because they can just be intercepted too many different ways. You want to make sure that people are using the appropriate hardware and that it's always up to date so that they're not being taken advantage of by bugs in their system that allow people to gain access to their local devices. Uh, you want to prevent any unauthorized access to your system. This minimizes the risk of credential theft. It also minimizes potential breaches, which is very important. And also, this is just HIPAA security rules. These are what you need to follow to stay HIPAA compliant.
So really non-negotiable, especially as the security rule is expected to change around this later this year. So a really important factor. Peter, let's stick with you and talk a little bit about employee training.
This is where I have fun. Uh, Employees should be constantly trained on HIPAA policies. It's mandatory per HIPAA that each employee in your company that may potentially deal with HIPAA, and even those that don't, get annual HIPAA training. We do constant HIPAA training here. We do a yearly annual course that is given by an outside party just so that we know that we get a different perspective. Um, then we also do constant HIPAA training every month just to make sure that our techs are up to date on everything. We also do phishing attacks to make sure that they're not falling for those. Those are done on a quarterly basis. And if people need additional training, you can set them up for additional training because you've understood where your weak points are by doing that phishing test and seeing who may have fallen for it by accident. So it's good to keep people up on the latest threats and just make sure that you're always making sure they're up to date. So if some new threat comes along, they know not to fall for it.
Indeed, the human factor really key. I mean, taking all the technology and technical steps is obviously prudent, but the human factor is also huge. So cannot overstate the importance of employee training. Okay, Tom, let's go back to you. Talk a little bit about some of the legal hurdles maybe and some of the rules and types of things you need to be aware of as you think about HIPAA compliance.
Certainly. So one of the most important legal pieces when you're engaging with vendors is your BAA, right? Or your business associate agreement. And when you think about, all of your different vendors that may have access to PHI, very, very important that you understand that, right? And understand that, a BAA is an absolute requirement for a HIPAA compliant solution. Without one, it's not compliant, even if it's, the most secure Fort Knox type solution that you can possibly find. Without a BAA and without that BAA in your files, you're out of compliance, right? But another point here too that is very important for us to understand is not all BAAs are created equal, right? There are different organizations handle encryption and handle HIPAA compliance in different ways, right? There are some where, the security is incredibly tight. You can engage, you can use your PHI exactly as you would like to. And there are others that tell you you're HIPAA compliant if you just don't put PHI in your solution and they'll sign a BAA, right? So really important to understand that one, BAAs are absolutely mandatory, but also there are many different flavors of them and important to understand what your obligations as the customer are to make sure that you stay compliant.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Tom. We're going to stick with you. We'll have to pick up the pace here a little. But let's talk about the new security rule, and we'll actually probably do a follow-on webinar on this topic specifically, just FYI.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you can imagine, HIPAA is constantly changing, right? It's gone through quite an evolution, initially starting with protecting data that's printed on paper and stored in manila folders, right? And really evolved into what it is today, right? So very important that, you're on top of what those changes are and incorporating those into your annual risk assessments and training programs as well.
Indeed. And again, we've got some resources on this. This is one we're also happy to help on. You can reach out to us and we'll help answer your questions specifically. We're navigating it too at the moment, frankly. We expect it to go into effect later this year. So it's pretty normal to have questions on this one. Okay, Peter, over to you. Let's talk about incident response plans.
Uh, uh, a very important thing to do with HIPAA and just in general for your security of your company is to have a process in place to document what you're going to do in the case of an incident. Like, was your computer breached? Was somebody's computer stolen? Did somebody drop a hard drive full of unencrypted information out in the wild? Do you want to know how you're going to handle this? Who's going to be in charge of this? The point of contact person? What team is going to investigate it? What they're going to be investigating and how they're going to be documenting it, and then how you're going to mitigate it. So these are all the things you want to keep in mind when you're creating an incident response plan. Plus, you really want to test this plan out yearly. That doesn't mean like you physically have to throw a hard drive out into the wild and, you know, see what happens. But you should do scenarios where you pretend at least that something happens, like a hard drive has gone out in the wild, or a flash drive, or somebody's computer got lost or stolen from their car. You want to be completely comfortable with the process so that in the case that it does happen, you can react instead of trying to figure out what to do.
Absolutely.
Indeed, thanks, Peter. And documenting your procedures is good. It's not the first time you'll see this in the deck, but really keeping everything in writing is probably the best advice, not just your incident response plan. So, okay, let's move on to regularly testing and auditing. Tom, this is you.
Yeah, it's, as you think about your HIPAA compliance program, right, and you think about the incident response plans that you have in place, very important that you exercise those plans, right? This is something that we do internally almost continuously. And when you think about, what goes into actually performing an incident response or your various compliance pieces, it's one of the most important pieces is that people know what to do in the event of the of a of a situation, right? And that normal testing, normal auditing piece is huge to this point.
Excellent. Okay, let's quickly hit number 12, one of my favorite topics, PHI. Tom?
Absolutely. Mine too. But although we love PHI, right? Those who should have access to it are quite limited, right? Somebody that doesn't have any business accessing PHI should have no access to PHI, right? Making sure that you've got tight role-based permissions in your systems and um, your your tools is incredibly important to make sure that you're not exposing yourself to unnecessary risk.
Okay, pretty straightforward that one. Thank you for that, Tom. Peter, let's move over to you to talk about authentication protocols.
Uh, so this is about SPF, DKM, and DMARC. SPF is Sender Policy Framework. It literally states what servers are allowed to send email on your behalf. DKM is domain keys. It's basically a cryptographic hash you sign emails with, which the recipient can then check against via your DNS to see if the email was actually sent via you. And DMARC is basically the policy that says what to do if SPF or DMARC fail. These are very important in just regular sending of email these days. Back in February of last year, both Google and Yahoo required anyone sending emails to people on their services to have configured valid SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. So nowadays, if you want to send an email and guarantee it's going to arrive, outside of, it getting caught by a spam filter for content, you need to make sure that your SPF, DKIM, and DMARC are set up properly. It has now become the industry standard. As I mentioned, it's required for Google and Yahoo-based email addresses if you want to get a hold of them at all. It's really good, and you want to document your setup so that you have all this documented for future reference. Because if something should happen to your DNS where you need to recreate it, it's always best to have this documented so you can just go in and recreate it immediately.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Peter. Okay, Tom, over to you. Let's talk quickly about email retention and deletion policies.
Certainly. So, an email retention and deletion policy is a critical part of your overall HIPAA compliance program, right? There are kind of two sides to this, right? On one end, we don't want information sitting around that is unnecessary and creating exposure, right? But on the other side, incredibly important that you're maintaining logs and you have the retention policies in place and programs in place to make sure that you're retaining your records for the recommended amount of time by the regulations.
Excellent. Good information there. Peter, we're going to keep moving. We're going to come back to you to talk about DLP policies.
So this is data loss prevention policies, basically automated tools that make it harder for data to leave your system when it shouldn't. You want to set up rules to DLP rules to prevent unauthorized sharing of PHI. Like if there shouldn't be social security numbers and emails coming from this person, you can set up a rule to that effect so that it gets quarantined and a notification goes out to the email address so it can get reviewed. You want to make sure that emails are encrypted automatically. That way you're not leaving up to user choice, because sometimes that choice might not be correct, whether or not it's intentional or not. And you always want to make sure that your DLP rules are active and that people know about them. This way, they'll only send out the appropriate information in the appropriate email and not accidentally send out PHI to an email address they shouldn't.
Excellent. Okay, Peter, we're going to stay for you. Let's talk quickly about social engineering, another topic I'm fond of.
Okay. So social engineering is a big component to how scammers get information about your account so that they can later use that information to get more information about your accounts or break into your system. Basically, it's the use of using deception or manipulative terminology to get people to divulge information to them. This is where your security policy comes in very, very important. Well, it's very, very important. You want to make sure that your team is up to date on your security policy and that it's enforced. Having a security policy that is only active under certain circumstances is not ideal. You want it to be constant. It's always the same security policy. You don't break it under any circumstance. That's the best way to prevent social engineering, because your techs know and your employees know that they're just not supposed to go with this information under any circumstance. For social engineering, one of the best things I can tell you is if you receive an email with a link in it that you're not expecting, don't click the link, delete the email. That's the best advice I can give you and all of your employees.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Peter. We got to keep moving here a little quickly. Tom, we're going to go over to you for archiving.
Absolutely. So I touched on this on tip 14, right? Super important that you're maintaining your retention and the logs of your communications that contain PHI, right? So the degree to which you can make that automatic and make that in a way where an end user can't manipulate those archived emails is huge, right? And set it and forget it is a thing, right? It's not just the rotisserie chickens. It comes with email archiving too.
Excellent. Thanks for that. Peter, let's talk about passwords. A lot of people know this, but let's give some quick reminders here on good password policies.
Uh, well, a good password policy is never use the password or password 123. Those are the most common passwords out there and obviously should never be used. You want to make sure that you have unique and complex passwords. They should be at least 12 characters long, in my opinion, with an uppercase, a lowercase, a special character, and a number. Preferably not a phrase, but I'm not going to say that a phrase cannot be used. Um, one of my favorite things to say is make sure that most of the password is not Googleable, meaning that if you're using a password, it can be run against a password hack tool, which is basically one where you can see if the password has already been hacked. If you're if that password has been hacked in the past, don't ever consider it for usage. Um, you want to make sure that passwords are not being used across the same password is not being used across multiple portals. You should only use one password per portal. Make it different when you go to a different portal. That way, if one gets compromised, your other portal that you use is not compromised. Another key factor is to prevent brute force attacks. You want to make sure that when people are not getting their password right, that they get locked out after a certain amount of attempts. Usually, like, you know, 5 attempts in 5 minutes locks them out for 15 minutes. And you want to make sure that your employees are aware that they should not be using passwords. They should not be using simple passwords. You want to train them on password hygiene just so that they're more secure in their everyday life and at work, and you're more secure that way.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Peter. We're on the home stretch here, Tom. I'm going to hand it over to you for the last two, 19 and 20.
Absolutely. So an email gateway is an incredibly important tool, particularly when you think about using Google Workspace or Microsoft 365, right? So what a gateway does is it sits behind the Google Workspace or Office 365 and encrypts the messaging that is outgoing, right? Really, really important, right? When you think about Google, you need to have a gateway in order to be HIPAA compliant. That's a very important piece. With Outlook or Office 365, rather, there are some other options with Microsoft, but a gateway is certainly recommended. But a huge, huge benefit, and I have to remind everybody there's no such thing as free HIPAA compliant email, right? So at gmail.com, at outlook.com, at yahoo.com I don't think a gateway is even possible on those. We can hop forward to our last one there, Pete. And, so as you think about all of these different pieces and how all of this really comes together, at the end of the day, what you need to be focused on is ensuring that you're working with HIPAA compliant vendors, right? Email in particular. We've gone through a number of tips here that have been huge, know, to minimize your exposure. But at the end of the day, email is still one of the number one vectors for security incidents, and very, very important that you're making the proper selection when it comes to those with whom you're doing business.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Tom and Peter. We got through our 20. I'm going to wrap it up very quickly here. Again, just a reminder about LuxSci. We do email, but marketing forms, text as well. So we're happy to answer any questions. Probably what we're most proud of is our customer relationships. Customers typically stay with us for years, and we pride ourselves in great technology and really the best support in the business. So had to give a shout out to our customers. Are there any questions? We do have the chat open. And If there is not, I will leave it at that. Again, I thank you very much. Follow us on LinkedIn. We share a lot of this content, 2, 3 blogs a week, all designed to be really educational and practical. So if you're not following us on LinkedIn, just go there, search LuxSci. We're the only ones. And follow us and get some good info there. And coming soon, HIPAA compliant marketing. So stay tuned for that. And thank you again all for attending.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.